when I watched this documentary, I realized that probably that dose was one of the first ever given in the Canadian Army. Palmer Howard had made it in his own lab. Following that, however, we had lots of penicillin, both American and British made. It was...
But it must have been quite an experience, so I realize you're probably one of the first persons to do that.
It was, because we really were so apart from any news. We really didn't know anything about penicillin until it turned up in the Army. And as I say, following that, everybody had it, and it saved a great many lives. We left the tent city when the casino fell, and we found that we'd been sitting on a minefield. We must have had a lot of guardian angels around, because nobody was killed. But one was right under the kitchen table, and the knob showed up when the dust flew away. However, we got away from there, and we moved a good deal. The fighting was fast and very vicious, and it was very hard on the Canadians. And we ended up in a place called Rimini on the Adriatic coast. We spent the winter there, and that was hard on us and on the soldiers, because they'd been thrown back into action so many times. They had no reinforcements. And then suddenly the invasion had started, and the war in Italy was over. And we moved back down to, eventually to Naples. But first of all, we had to leave Rimini, and we went down by ambulance until the ambulance was dead-heading with the hospital, you see, and the colonel said, well, the nurses can travel in the ambulances and sleep in them, which we did until we got near Rome, and then the colonel who was in charge of the movement said, the convoy said, oh, we can't have women on this convoy, we're not equipped for women. And we said we seem to be doing all right. However, they left us in Rome, which was a great hardship. 2 weeks in Rome. And so we waited there, and then they flew us. They took us by convoy again, or transport down to Naples, and we went by boat to Marseille, and we stayed there for a couple of weeks, and then flew up to Belgium, and later to Holland. And we were in a place called Tilburg in Holland. And that was where I saw my first buzz bomb. And when I saw it, they used to go over the town every morning. They'd start at daylight, and they looked like great big bumblebees, and they made quite a noise and shake the building. But this time, we were sleeping on the main street, the nurses in front of the building, and it seemed to be an awful lot of noise and a lot of shaking of the building. And I went to the window, and this buzz bomb was going right down the main street.
Oh my gosh.
And you know, they're narrow streets. In Holland, they build high, houses are high, and people live over the shops. And I went away from the window, and
Excuse me. The description of that buzz bomb on the tape was accompanied by some real sound effects. Somebody out here with a blower blowing leaves into a sack or something, and we had to cut off. However, we were back again, so Jean, go ahead with the story of the buzz bomb.
Well, as I say, I went away from the window, and I thought, this couldn't happen, and if I tell anybody, they'll think I'm really over the hill. So I went to breakfast and said nothing. And one of the officers mentioned that a lot of buzz bombs this morning, and I said, well, yes. He said, some of them were quite close, I thought. Very noisy. And I said, yes. I said, do they ever go down, like, almost on the street and then go up again?
Yeah.
Which would have been.
Yeah, yeah.
And he said, oh, yeah, they get in air currents.
You weren't hallucinating after all.
So I said, well, one did.
Yeah.
And I said, I didn't like to tell you because I thought you'd all think I was really over the hill. So we all laughed. Anyway, everybody wanted to hear about this great thing, and we escaped complete demolition. But Silberg, we had patients, again in a convent, and then we went to another convent, which was a monastery, which was in Nijmegen. And
we're in Holland now, are we?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's where the buzz bomb was in Tilburg.
Oh, excuse me. I'm sorry for the interruption, but I thought there was something wrong with the tape recorder, but apparently it's working okay. So I'm sorry, Jean. Continue.
Well, after in Nijmegen, we took patients, surgical and wounded, and it was there that VE Day occurred, and after that, our clientele changed greatly. We had prisoners of war who had just been let out of the gates and wandered off and entered into the first Canadian camp they found, and our hospital was one.
Yeah.
And these boys would come in, and they were not too badly off. They were malnourished, and they had desert sores on their legs, but we could fix them up.
Yeah.
We fed them and treated them. But then they started clearing the concentration camps, and they brought us these poor souls who had been picked off piles of dead. They were still breathing. And that was the most horrendous thing, and something I'll never forget.
No, I wouldn't imagine.
And none of them lived.
Living skeletons.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they had their little possessions with them. I remember one man with a pair of reading glasses, which would be very precious, and a piece of gold that must have come out of his tooth.
Oh, jeez. Yeah.
And they were beyond speech. They didn't talk to us. But they knew they were safe. Yeah. But they died. We couldn't keep them alive. They were too far gone. Yeah. And that was very heartrending.
I would imagine so.
And I still get very angry when I hear people say it didn't happen.
Yeah.
Because I had an American cousin who was an administrative officer in an American hospital. Yeah. And they cleared out of a concentration camp, and he had pictures that were horrible. But following that, we were moved again to a town called Apeldoorn, and there we were taking patients for a little while, but not for long. They closed us down, and some of our nurses were sent to Germany to service a hospital in Germany, and the rest of us who were longer service were sent to England to go home. And so I was in charge of the party, and I had been made the acting matron just before.
Good.
Well, it didn't mean much because I never got the rank or the money or anything. But all I was in charge of the party to go back to England, which meant I had to watch the luggage, which meant I never got anything to eat. But we were always trying to get the luggage onto the right conveyance, because the people in charge didn't seem to know how to read the label.
No.
So, and anyway, we stayed in England for a week or two, I think, and then we went home on the New Amsterdam, and then by train from Halifax to British Columbia. And on the train, of course, I got an upper berth. And I thought, oh darn, I get another upper berth again. And then I found out that the girls who were, that anyone in the lower berth was sharing it with somebody else. That's how crowded these trains were. So I was glad I had it to myself.
Yeah.
On the train, I signed up to go to Japan. And you know, you sort of, once you get into the army, it's kind of hard to settle down again.
It's hard to face civilian life again.
And we were given 30-day leave when we got to Westminster, Vancouver, whatever. And during that time, they dropped the bombs. So I knew that I wanted to go back to the University of Toronto, and it was August, you see, so I was in good time for the opening of the fall term. And so they didn't want to discharge us right away when we were just over from the battle area, because it took a bit of settling in. So I went in to see this matron-in-chief, and she said, well, I'm sending you to Vernon, to the OR there. And I said, well, I was sort of hoping to get my discharge so that I could go back to Toronto. And she said, oh, sure. Well, they couldn't get rid of me fast enough, because all of a sudden they had all these nurses. And so I got my discharge and a ticket back to Toronto. And the officer who did my discharge said, say you want to be discharged in Toronto, then you won't have to pay your way back there. Well, of course I did want to be discharged in Toronto. And so I managed to get into the School of Social Work that year. And I managed, along with, we had found out, you see, that we could get university training as part of our separation. There were different options, but I got my fees and $60 a month.
Is that right?
That's what I had imagined, living on $60 a month. But that's what I had to try to do, and that's how I got to Toronto.
That's interesting. That in itself, too, would be quite a change after your war experiences, Jean. And,
but you know, we were a lot of veterans there.
Oh, yes, sure.
Because they were not taking younger people. They were letting the veterans go first. And we were subject to quite a sophisticated curriculum. That there were one or two younger ones just out of Pass Arts, you know. And they were having a hard time with the material because they had no life experience, and we did, you know. But that was something, you see, I'd wanted to do, because when I was working at the East End of Vancouver, I had seen this money spent on treatment, medical treatment, and then not enough food to keep people out. So
keeping them alive for what?
I thought there must be something better than this.
That's interesting. That thought crossed my mind when you're talking about their exposure to some social problems in the East End. Well, except anywhere, but particularly in the East End in this case, that it really didn't surprise me to hear that you were interested in social work later on.
Well, I had wanted to do it before, but didn't really have the money to go back to university. And I'd also been advised by one of the provincial social workers, who was a very fine woman. She was recruiting untrained people, and she said, Miss Dorgan, you know, you have your degree in nursing and you're well qualified in that. She said, if you come in with us, you'll be an untrained worker. And she said, this is not good.
That's right.
But she said, if you want to get into social work, I can get you a scholarship. Well, the scholarship was like $400 or something, and I had no money.
Yeah.
So, of course, I didn't do it, but I kept it in mind, and I've always been grateful to her for that advice, because I would have made a bad decision there.
Yes, yes.
And,
yes.
So,
well, there are two distinct fields.
Yes.
Nursing and social work. Both equally important.
Well, they work together quite well.
Of course.
Yes. That's when I.
But I understand now, if I might just that many of the nurses, I don't know that much about it, but are receiving in their courses of studies in the social and the behavioral sciences, as well as the physical sciences. Yeah.
They did then too, but not enough.
Not enough. No.
And the social workers weren't getting enough of help.
No.
And so between the two, mistakes could be made.
Of course. Of course.
So, and I never realized why they wanted me in Ottawa. I did this teaching for a number of years at the school.
Yeah.
And then I didn't want to go on to a teaching career, so I saw this job advertised, and I filled out the government, civil service application with my experience, and I got a letter back that they were sorry that this was the wrong job that they'd advertised, that competition had been filled. But they would like me to apply for another one, which was in the mental health division. So I wrote back and said, well, I don't really have any more experience than what I put on my application. So I said, you can resubmit it to the mental health division, but I don't really consider myself a specialist in this field. And however, I got the job in no time because this is what they wanted. The two backgrounds.
Good.
And so I stayed there, going from various departments, but always with the handicap.
May I just go back just a moment? When did you get your Master of Social Work degree?
1949.
49.
I went.
So that's
when
3 years.
When I finished 2 years at
4 years.
Let's see, I went in 45. 47. I got 48. I got my master's degree. No, it was 49. They weren't giving a master's degree when I entered the Toronto school. And so I came out of 2 years with a certificate. But I had to write a master's degree thesis, and I knew what I wanted to do, but I couldn't get access to the material. But a year later, I could. I worked in DVA for a year at the Shaughnessy Hospital, and I didn't really care much for it, and I went back to Toronto because the opportunities were there. And
well, you actually came back here, then went back. I see.
And then there was, I found I could get access to the files I needed, and so I worked that year part-time for the university and on my thesis. And I got my master's the next year.
It's very interesting. You have quite a diversified and comprehensive background, one might say. Yes.
Lots of
things. You certainly have. You know,
when someone says to me they've been all these years in the one job, I think I don't know how they can stand it. But there are people who are like that and they're happy. But I could give 2 or 3 years to a job, and then I feel, well, I've done as much as I can here. I like to move on.
So you actually finished your professional career then in Ottawa. And you retired there, then moved back to your hometown in Westminster.
I decided, that the winters were so long, and I wanted to travel, and I owned a home there. And you can't go away in the winter and leave a house.
No.
And the neighbor said, "Oh, you go, we'll look after you. We don't want you to sell your house." But I knew that mightn't last for long, looking after somebody else's house in the winter. So I went off on a freighter, and when I came back, I decided to.
Can I ask you, where did you go on the freighter?
Well, I took a container freighter from New Jersey.
Oh, yes.
And just before Christmas.
Okay.
And it went right down through the Panama Canal and right across, and up to Oakland, and then right across to Hong Kong and Japan.
And experiences in every port, I imagine.
Oh, yeah, it was just wonderful.
Fantastic?
And very interesting people.
Oh.
You know. They only have 12 passengers that are.
Yeah.
That's all they take.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you have lovely accommodation, and you eat with the officers. And it was an American ship.
Yeah.
And I corresponded with these people for a long time.
Yeah.
And and people didn't take the whole trip. They'd come on and off, so you'd meet new ones, you know, and they'd all done interesting things.
Yes, sure.
People who go on freighters have lots of interesting things.
Oh, I would imagine so.
But, I loved it, you know, all of it. And we'd have these people waiting at every port, and they would know exactly how much time the ship had, and they'd come aboard and offer us a package tour, you see, for so much, we'll take you here, and they were always very good.
Yeah, sure.
And they'd all come down to the dock with their suitcases. Yeah. This was Hong Kong especially. And the suitcases would be full of suits and things that they'd made for the officers, you know. Well, they'd come aboard and they had all that stuff too. Singapore was the place for watches. Yeah. Sorry I didn't buy one, but anyway. But the officers, you see, would go to these Hong Kong tailors and order suits.
Oh, yeah.
And then it'd be ready when they came back.
Oh, yeah.
And anyway, when I got home, I got to New Jersey, to the docks there, and it was 80 degrees. It was in March, and people were in their shirt sleeves.
Oh, jeez.
Then I got to Ottawa,
and
the snow was. I had a curved driveway to my garage. It went like this. The snow was that high, and my boy that had been shoveling for me continued to do it. Yeah. And there was just a tunnel. The taxi driver had to drive slow to find it. This is it. So I phoned my sister and said, "What do you think if I moved back west?" And she said, "I think it'd be great."
Oh, yes.
So I sold my house. I came out here, bought a house, and went back there and sold the house and moved out. And it was the lawyer who was conveyancing the place I bought in Richmond said, "Gene, you don't do it that way. You can't buy a house before you've sold your other house." And I said, "Well, I just did." I said, "I'll sell my other house," which I did. I sold it in 2 weeks. So I stayed in Richmond for quite a while until it was quite a big house, and it got too much. Moved over here.
And then you found yourself in Irving House.
Yeah. Well, how I came to Irving House, see, I passed that house as a child, going to St. Anne's Convent.
Yeah, you would,
And I was always curious about it. Yeah. And then we moved to 3rd Street, and my mother knew the Briggs ladies, and they would make cakes for their friends, you know, people that knew them. And it was all...
for a charge?
Oh, yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
Of course.
They were having hard times.
Right.
So it was all done, you know, the money would be in an envelope. And I was 13. Yeah, I was 13 when we moved up there. We were just up in the 200 blocks, just up the street. And so Mother would send me down with this envelope, and Naomi would open the door just a little crack and bring out she used to make mocha balls, which I have to tell Marlene how to make these mocha balls. We're going to have them sometime.
I think so. Yeah. That'd be a good idea.
Anyway, I'd go back home with this stuff. And when I was a little girl, just going down the hill to the convent, it must have been Mr. Briggs with his goatee. He was over the fence handing out apples. And I guess he was giving them to all the kids, but I just remember him giving. So they must have had an orchard there, maybe on the other side of the lane. But
he died in 1920. Did he around there sometime?
I'm not sure, but we have it though. We have that thing.
So that was around that time, or just before that time?
Well, I was only, I think I was about 7 when this happened. Yeah. So I would have, that would have been, if I was 7, that'd be 1917, I guess.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I was 17, 1917. And as I didn't really, I must have been pretty young because I didn't really know who they were.
I was just trying to get the years.
Yeah, I think that's
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, that's okay. And so, and then when my father was dying, he was in St. Mary's Hospital, and I had come out to see him. And I got him into the wheelchair one day, and at the end of the corridors at the end of St. Mary's Hospital had glass to the floor, which was kind of confusing. He'd had a stroke and he was very confused. And he said, "Run me over the lawn there. I got a meeting at Briggs's house." And so I don't know what, he must have had something to do with the taking over the house or something, or else they had a meeting for something else, but it was over there. So, but I didn't know much about that. Well, then, after I moved over here, I dropped in one day. I had a friend with me and met Marlene.
Oh, yes.
And Marlene was kind of intrigued because I told her that Mother had said that Manuela had been become a recluse because she'd been jilted. That was the story. But
that would be
we don't know because there's nothing in the paper about an engagement or a broken engagement. Lorraine hasn't been able to find anything. But that was the story. So I just thought, well, I'd like to work here. Sure. So I went in one Sunday and spoke to Archie. And I said I'd like to be a volunteer, and he got out a paper, very old application paper, about sanding floors and things. And I said, well, I've sanded furniture, I haven't done many floors. Anyway, I've filled this thing up and thought they'd be phoning me, but they didn't. And so I just went in one day, and Valerie was there. And so she said, well, sure, she'd give me some stuff to read, and I could volunteer if I liked. But then she wanted to know, after this had been going on for a few days, what I'd like to be paid, or how I wanted to be paid, or something. And I said, well, I didn't want to be paid. I just wanted to volunteer. Well, I didn't realize that they did have a minimum sort of for some of the volunteers. So I came on as an unpaid volunteer. And after that, they didn't call me if they'd call the ones who were paid first, because she had to use that budget. And but they'd call me for children's visits and things like that. I like meeting the people. I like going around with people. And I like taking the kids around. It's fun.
Well, that's very interesting. Very interesting indeed. You've certainly, I think you should write your autobiography. It would be without a doubt a bestseller. And I'm interested also in the nurses' reunion you attended just recently too.
Well, in a way, that was kind of sad because it was to be our last, you know. Because we're all getting pretty old, and but Prince Edward Island is a beautiful place, and they're so hospitable, you know. And of course, the Veterans Affairs is there. And I probably shouldn't say this, but I think they just became aware they had nurses on. You know, they really don't pay much attention to nurses, Army nurses. Anyway, but they pulled out all the stuff, and we had a very nice dinner at luncheon at Confederation House, and a reception at the Lieutenant Governor's home, which is beautiful, and the tours around, and we had, of course, meetings about what to do next. And it's been decided that we will have our next meeting in Toronto, but we won't. The thing is, there aren't enough nurses now to organize these things. They're either not enough or they're not able. And so we had a lobster dinner and all kinds of things. It was really lovely. And people in the street would come up and say, "Oh, you're with the nurses. We're so glad you came." And this national president, who's quite a firebrand, lives in Prince Edward Island, and she, I think, worked at DVA at one time. She's retired now. And she got a lot of these people in to talk to us who were as freebies. Their expenses were being paid for somebody else. Mike Duffy was there, the journalist, and he had us enthralled for an hour and a half. He's one story after that. And then Cliff Chatterton of the War Ants, who's really a wonderful man, and the assistant deputy minister and different people all spoke to us. And I think the funniest thing was taking the picture, because the weather wasn't good, it rained all the time. And they wanted us to go, there's big steps up outside, there's a sort of a plaza, and these steps go up to wherever, I don't know. And they wanted us all to be up on these steps. Well, those of us who weren't on canes should have been, I think. There were no railings, And, right then I was just beginning to walk. I was really handy. And so he wanted us all, he was a young man, he had no idea what he was in for, and he wanted us all up on this thing. After the luncheon, we were supposed to go to the Lieutenant Governor's for tea, so we were all dressed up. But it rained, and so we were wearing rain hats and rain jackets, and it's really going to be one of the funniest pictures that you ever saw. They're sending us each one. At, I don't know what I said after.
Well, you made reference to the book. The Military Nurses of Canada.
I was talking about meeting old friends, and unfortunately, we didn't meet anyone from our unit. It was a small one, and although some of the women came from the Maritimes, they must be dead because they didn't turn up. And we did know, of course, the executive from Vancouver and so on. But
go ahead. Sorry.
I'm going to go on to something about Edith Landells was there. And she was the one who put this book together, the Military Nurses of Canada. And she's quite a remarkable woman. She was too young to get in the army as a nurse until the very end of the war, and of course she never got overseas because the war was over. So she then joined up with the Americans and went to Korea as a nurse.
I see.
And then she spent most of her working life in the United States and took her master's degree in nursing there and did all kinds of things. But she's still militantly Canadian, and she moved back to Canada, and she had this idea of this book, and she just invited nurses to write in what they could. And if you didn't want to, you didn't have to. But the book got no attention whatsoever.
Is that right?
Not one radio station reviewed it. All the business of a year ago in Normandy and all the rest, nobody paid any attention to the nurses. They invited the Secretary of State, at the last minute, asked if they could send a nurse to the reunion in Italy, and you had to write up all this stuff, a whole biography, and have it in within 24 hours or something.
Yeah.
And if you brought a companion, you had to pay for it.
Oh, jeez, yeah.
Well, one nurse for the whole
yeah.
Italy, and the same thing for Normandy. It was rather poor.
Yeah.
And
that's too bad.
Edith gave this Richmond the Richmond radio station.
Oh, yes, I see.
The names of a couple of people they could phone that would talk to them about the book, but they never followed it up.
Yeah.
We wanted, oh dear me, what is her name? She was with CBC. Oh dear, it's not on.
Locally or from Toronto?
No, from Vancouver. Girl with big glasses. She's on TV now.
Oh, I don't.
In the mornings. You know who I'm talking about.
Yes.
Oh,
yes.
Isn't that awful?
That's okay.
What age does. You forget names.
Yeah, well.
Anyway, they weren't interested.
No.
Nobody wanted it.
But actually, of course, it's a different generation.
Yeah.
And all these people, they were just babes in arms when the war was on, And it means absolutely nothing to them.
No.
And
but they were making so much about Normandy invasion and
yes, spectacular.
Yeah,
spectacular.
And, they forget that before they could have the invasion, all these poor souls had to fight their way up North Africa and up Italy.
I know. Yeah.
And they get no attention.
No. There are a lot of unsung heroes, you know.
Yeah.
It's and I think to a certain extent you're an unsung hero too.
Wow. It's not that. It's just that
I understand.
We were there.
I
it would be
understand.
nice to be asked once in a while. But I found I had sent the book to my nephew in Halifax, and never heard anything about it. But he, of course, they wanted me to stay with them after the Prince Edward Island deal. So he met me in Halifax, and I stayed overnight. And then he drove me to Prince Edward Island and stayed there. He was having a golf weekend and brought me back again. So I went over the new bridge. But by now he's very interested, you see. But he wasn't before, I don't think. No. And so we were down on the Halifax docks. His office is there. It looks down on all this refurbished dock. And he said, well, you left from Halifax, where? And I said, well, where would the Queen Elizabeth have docked? And he said, well, it was way down there. I said, we went on by train, so there had to be tracks. And so he was reading up afterwards, but no, they're not very interested.
No. It's interesting, too, I might say. I spoke to a friend of mine about this, about your article particularly, which appears in that book. And exceptionally well written, I would say, in my humble opinion. And he read it, he said, my gosh, he said, those nurses, he said, I just pictured them in, behind the lines in white uniforms. He said, these people are right on in the thick of it, including the mud, and he had changed his whole opinion of nurses. Wartime nurses. Of course, they really didn't understand what was happening.
Well, the moment we all looked very glamorous in those very impractical uniforms, the blue and white and the veil. But once we were on our way to Italy, we were all in battle dress, just.
You wore shorts at one time too.
Oh yeah, that was so funny. Anyone now wouldn't think it was funny at the time. I missed that explosion because I'd gone to see Marlene Dietrich.
Oh yeah.
She was entertaining the troops, and we were allowed to send so many nurses up the road somewhere. And I think we drew lots or something. And I went up. And I remember feeling so inadequate because I was all yellow from Neverton and I had a terrible haircut. Somebody had hacked my hair off. We didn't have any way of looking after ourselves at all. and here was this glamorous Marlene.
Yeah.
Anyway, we were introduced to her, and I hated to shake her hand.
Yeah.
I felt I was so...
That's an experience.
Yeah.
Meeting a celebrity like that.
Well, she was there with Danny Thomas.
Danny Thomas.
And we didn't know anything about Danny
No,
then, but he was, I realized when I saw him later on TV, and just out in the field. And all the men wanted to see Marlena's legs, but she wore pants, so they didn't see her legs.
So, you were telling me that the tape, or I should say that the article was originally put on tape. Is that correct? And then you wrote it?
Well, yes, but it didn't work out.
No. Maybe it was a cheap tape recorder.
Well,
it might have been a cheap tape
could
recorder.
Have been. It was, well, actually, I have the tape still.
Yeah.
But, and it didn't sound too bad. I thought I couldn't have said that. You know, Ellen had the typist take it off, you see.
Yeah.
And I thought, I'm sure I didn't say that. So I played the tape.
Yeah.
And I didn't. It just hadn't come through very well. I guess maybe my voice was difficult or something. But there were so many errors in it that I just said, Edith, we can't use this, and I'll write it out, which I did.
Right. Yeah.
I took some fool's cap and just took the whole thing.
Well, it's difficult sometimes just to say something off the top of your head, because when you're writing, you have to write it several times.
Yeah.
So on. Well, I've taken a great deal of your time this afternoon. Incidentally, before I say anything else, or ask you to say anything else, I should say, I'd just like to point out that I appreciate it very much you giving me the permission, you might say, to make a copy of your article.
Oh, I don't mind.
And I'm going to submit that with my interview summary to the museum archives, because I think it should be there.
Yeah.
It's a very good. It portrays a very good picture of not only the kinds of responsibilities and experiences you had, but the hardships you had to go through, and then learn to take all these in your stride. It's remarkable.
You know, I don't know, I guess.
Would you like to comment further on any part of this interview that you might have thought any question I should have asked you, but I didn't ask you? Or?
No, I don't think so. I think that there's an awful lot in there. I feel I may have shortchanged some of the things, you know, and talked too much about others.
No, it's all been very interesting.
Yeah.
You talked a great deal about your childhood, and you talked growing up in Westminster, going to university, which and entering the Bachelor of Fine Arts. I mean, excuse me, of not fine arts, but I've been thinking about fine arts lately. What was it again? Bachelor of Applied Science. Applied Science, right.
You know, there's a funny thing here. They don't give me my master's degree here.
I noticed that.
And
later on,
there's a few errors in here and each time you read it, you pick it up somewhere. Maybe I was wondering if Edith just wanted to stress the nursing bit, but she said no, that I must not have had it on my material that I gave her, which I thought I did, but anyway. But there are things. Now, this was a very interesting place.
What is that? This for the tape?
Yeah, that was where we were at Anagni after Casino.
Anagni. Oh,
we went up to Ferentino, and when we got there, they said, "Oh, we want you to keep moving," and we ended up at this place, which that is a very ancient church.
Oh, yes.
1200.
Oh, yeah. 1200.
Yeah,
amazing.
But these wings were new.
Yes.
And it was built by Mussolini, the troops.
Yes.
Sons of officers.
Sons of officers.
And they all had these uniforms for the three services.
Yeah.
And it was a beautiful place, but it was weird.
Yeah.
And as I told you, this was the place where they hadn't buried the dead.
Yeah. Yes, that was an interesting and rather shocking.
Yeah.
That you mentioned that when the Germans left, they took everything with them, and except their dead, of course.
Yeah. One of the girls went to reach up and see what's this, and an arm came flying down.
Yeah, an amputated leg and covered. But not burying the dead properly, then the heat would happen, enable them to rise in the grave, and that's just absolutely unbelievable.
It's weird, you know. We started to clean these wards, you see, and we were sleeping in one, and the colonel told us just to put our bedrolls on the bed, and sleep on them. And I looked out the window. We opened the windows to get some air in, and then the smelling. Looked down the window, and there's a great pile of earth up against the house. So I went and got the sergeant. That was what it was. Then the other thing that was kind of interesting but scary was we'd been warned about anti-personnel bombs, you know. And never pick up anything that looked good. It might be tight, you know, drawers. And I opened this desk drawer. We were going to use this little room as a ward office, you see. And this thing rolled around in the bottom of the desk, and it looked like a flashlight. But I didn't touch it, and I looked at both ends. It didn't have a lens on it. And so I didn't even shut the drawer. I left it open. And went off to get the sergeant major, and he said, "Oh yeah, well you did right. Just go back and see nobody goes in there, and I'll come and see what we do about it." So I was coming back down the hall, and I met a nurse called Gustafson, and she was a great, great, beautiful girl, Danish looking. I think she was a Dane, and she always looked just perfect, and she was a good nurse. But she was slow on the uptake.
I see.
She took a while to think about him. And here she is with this thing in her hand.
Oh, boy, oh, boy.
See, I don't know, Dorgan, I found this in the drawer. I don't think it's a flashlight. She said, I said, Gussie, put it down. Don't drop it. Just put it down gently. Well, I'm sure it's I don't know what it is. She wasn't listening.
No.
And I got so mad at her, you know. I said, blow yourself up then, and I ran. She could have blown her hands off. It was a dud. Must have been because when the sergeant came, he went white when he saw this nut with this thing in her hand. And he said, well, it was dud, because that was an anti-personnel bomb for sure. Anyway.
That is absolutely amazing. The thing, you know, it sort of reminds me of that other story you shared with me just earlier, or the other day, last week I guess it was, about the British, did I read it in the article? The British, the British, you know, you hear the dead rising in their graves and so forth, and somebody's concerned about who is going to eat and who is not going to eat in the mess. A major problem. Now, that's absolutely unbelievable.
That was up at Rimini. We were left alone. When we went to this Anagni, they pulled the troops back, the rest, and we were left there because we were, well, later on I read Feesby's history of the RCMC, that we were left there because they just wanted us to hold this building so the British wouldn't get it, you see. And so we felt kind of deserted, you know. But the British, then we came under the British, and they were so stuffy.
It's amazing. Well, Jean, thanks again for all this time. It's been extremely interesting and very highly informative.
I think I tend to go on, you know.
By doing that, you certainly illustrated clearly a marked dedication to your professions, both nursing and social work. And you certainly showed in my humble opinion, a great deal of compassion for the people with whom you worked. And no, that's very nice.
You couldn't really help it, you know.
No.
But you know something.
You know, that's the type of answer I expected from you. You couldn't really help it. Very good. That says a lot.
Well,
That's very good.
I don't know, but they, you know, the poor soldiers, they were so grateful for
Yes.
the care they got.
I know.
See?
Yeah.
But I remember this poor fellow coming in one time. He was covered with mud from top to bottom.
Yeah.
And there was sheets on the bed, clean sheets. He looked at me and said, "Sister, I can't get in there."
No.
Those clean sheets. And I said, "Never mind, we'll give you a bath after you get in."
After you get in there.
So,
Yeah.
but you know, this isn't. Is this on?
Sure.
Oh, I didn't know it was still on. I
Yeah.
shouldn't have talked about
Oh, yeah.
Bessie and the bomb. Well, this is by the way. I don't think you want it on them.
No,
It's
just
about Tom Trapp, because I know.
oh, you want to go back? Well,
Well, it's just that I noticed his name. He was up at the Tom Trapp old tech school. You know,
Yes,
they had a
he did,
reunion.
yeah.
It was
Oh,
on the
yeah.
record. So he must be well and getting on with things. Well, Tom came to see me when I was in Italy
oh, yes.
at Avellino, you see, because he was with the army.
Yeah.
And because he wasn't a soldier, or an officer, he had to stay outside the mess, and we visited outside the
Yeah.
mess.
Yeah.
And I thought, gosh, here's a chap
Yeah.
whose
Yeah.
4 uncles were officers, 3 were killed.
Yes. Yes.
His,
It just shows.
his
Yeah.
aunt's husband, his uncle by marriage, is
Yeah.
a World War ace
Yeah.
from World
Yeah.
War.
Well, this shows that the hypocrisy is
Yeah.
overwhelming. Gene, thanks very much
Not
again.
at all. Not
And,
at all. I enjoyed. But
As I say, you better start writing your memoirs.
sometimes all this stuff spills out because
Yeah.
it never has before.
Yeah, that's very good. And I feel privileged that you give me the opportunity to record it. I also want to thank you for the wonderful juice.
Oh.
Great juice. Marvelous.
Have another one
On a
before
nice
you go.
hot day like this, it just couldn't have been better. Thanks a lot.
Oh, thank you.
This interview was recorded at Gene's apartment on Quayside Drive in New Westminster. It happened to be one of the hottest days of the year, so we actually made the recording on Gene's balcony, where it was relatively cool. Consequently, the mic picked up the ambient sounds as well as our voices. Nevertheless, the playback is acceptably clear after one adjusts the volume and tone tuners.